Sophie Carter stood at the gates of Eastwood Academy, her heart pounding in her chest. The sprawling campus gleamed with wealth and privilege, its marble steps and manicured lawns an intimidating reminder of how far she was from her world. She is a transfer student who was favored through scholarship. Having lost her mother during her birth, her grandmother, Mrs. Lucy, had taken care of her education until recently, when she started battling with leukemia and had used up all her savings. She was confused on how to take care of her granddaughter's bill, but luckily, Sophie was selected from a scholarship program, and her life was about to be changed for good. Adjusting the strap of her worn-out backpack, she inhaled deeply. 1 year, she whispered to herself. You just have to survive 1 year. As Sophie stepped into the hallway, the scent of expensive perfumes and freshly polished floors overwhelmed her senses. The students moved in clusters, their laughter carefree, their clothes immaculate. She felt like an alien, her thrift store jeans and simple blouse drawing stares and whispers. "Who's that?" one girl muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. "No idea," her friend replied. "But she doesn't belong here." Sophie kept her gaze fixed on her schedule, trying to ignore the growing pit in her stomach. But her determination faltered when she turned a corner and collided with someone. "Watch it," a deep, irritated voice snapped. She looked up to see piercing green eyes glaring down at her. The boy was tall, his dark hair effortlessly messy, and his smirk both cruel and captivating. "I am sorry," Sophie stammered, stepping back. Zach Morgan, the school's golden boy and the son of one of the wealthiest moguls in the state, tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "New girl, huh? Let me guess, a charity case." Sophie's cheeks burned as laughter erupted around her. Before she could respond, Zach leaned closer, his voice a low murmur only she could hear. "Here's a tip. Don't get too comfortable. You don't belong here." The words stung, but Sophie refused to let him see her break. She pushed past him, her heart racing as the laughter followed her down the hall. During lunch in the cafeteria, Sophie had barely sat down with her tray of food when Zach appeared, flanked by his entourage. "Hey newbie," he called out, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "What's that you're eating? Looks like leftovers from a dumpster." The students around them burst into laughter as Zach grabbed her tray and tilted it, letting her food spill onto the table. "Oops," he said mockingly, his green eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Sophie clenched her fists, her face hot with humiliation. But no matter how much she wanted to scream at him, she knew it would only make things worse. "I am glad you are beginning to know your place. How about a soda welcome party?" He smirked. Sophie glanced up warily, unsure of his intentions. Before she could react, Zach tipped a can he was holding, and soda splashed across her shirt. "Aish," he said mockingly. "Guess your shirt wasn't designer enough to handle that." Laughter erupted around them, and Sophie buried her face. She stood up and left, refusing to let them see her tears. Watching from a distance was Ethan Blackwood. Unlike Zach, Ethan preferred to keep his thoughts to himself. He hated bullying, which made him dislike Zach a lot. His silver-gray eyes darkened at the sight of Sophie's discomfort. Something about Sophie's resilience intrigued him. Later, Ethan found Sophie in the hallway, trying to scrub the soda stain from her shirt. Without a word, he offered her a clean gray hoodie. "Thanks," she muttered, avoiding his gaze, their hands brushing for a brief second. A warmth spread through her at his kindness, though she quickly pushed it aside. "You shouldn't let them get to you," Ethan said. his silver-gray eyes meeting hers. Sophie's lips twitched into a small, grateful smile. She nodded, though her heart still ached from the earlier humiliation, but for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope. That evening, Sophie was reluctantly invited to a party at Zach's sprawling mansion by a classmate. The moment she arrived, she regretted it. The laughter and music were deafening, and she felt completely out of place. The Queen Bee Madison, upon spotting Sophie, saw an opportunity. She coaxed her into a side room under the pretense of showing her something. Before Sophie realized what was happening, Madison locked her inside the bathroom. Panic clawed at Sophie as she pounded on the door. Minutes later, it creaked open and Ethan stood there. His expression a mix of concern and anger. "Are you okay?" he asked, helping her out. "I'm fine," Sophie whispered, though her voice trembled. Ethan gently touched her face, his fingers brushing away a tear. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. "What are you doing?" Zach's voice broke the spell. He stood in the hallway, his gaze flicking between them. "Helping someone who actually needs it." The days that followed were nothing short of a nightmare. Zach and Madison seemed to have made it their personal mission to make her life miserable, most especially Zach. One day in gym class, Madison and her friends cornered Sophie in the locker room. "You think you're special because you got a free ride here?" Madison sneered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone. "You're just a charity case, and everyone knows it." The sting of their laughter echoed in Sophie's ears long after they left. She packed her backpack and walked out. Just as she was walking down the hallway, Zach's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, scholarship girl," he called, his green eyes gleaming with mischief. Sophie froze, her grip tightening on her backpack. She refused to look up, hoping he'd lose interest. "Don't ignore me," Zach said, strolling over with his usual confident swagger. His entourage of friends followed, laughing under their breath. He stood over her, crossing his arms. "What are you still doing here? Why don't you just quit? This school's not for people like you," he said, his voice low but mocking. She tried to ignore his gaze, but he leaned forward and lifted her face, holding it firmly. His touch sent waves of ecstasy down her spine. Sophie couldn't help but notice his sharp green eyes and the scent of his cologne. Sophie glared at him, her heart racing. She hated how close he was, how his piercing green eyes seemed to see right through her. "Maybe I don't care what people like you think," she shot back, surprising even herself. Zach's smirk faltered for a moment before returning. "Feisty," he murmured, stepping back. "Let's see how long that lasts." Zach's bullying intensified. He tore pages from her notebook, knocked her books to the ground, and humiliated her during gym class. But there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when he felt a tinge of uneasiness when she stared at him with her innocent and charming eyes. As Sophie's bullying increased, her friendship with Ethan blossomed. Ethan was her shield most times she was being bullied, but he wasn't always around as he was in a different classroom. One evening, Ethan walked Sophie home. The quiet streets gave them a sense of privacy, and Sophie found herself opening up to him about her struggles at Eastwood. "You're stronger than you think," Ethan said, brushing a stray hair from her face. The gesture was so tender it made Sophie's breath catch. He leaned in, and for a moment, Sophie thought he might kiss her. Oh, she pulled back, her emotions too tangled to sort out. Ethan smiled softly, as if understanding, and walked her to her door. One hot afternoon during break period, Zach was walking in the school's garden, unexpectedly. He saw Sophie, who was reading a book at one end of the garden. Unlike him, who never looked at someone twice, he began stealing glances at Sophie, who was focused on her book from his end. For the first time, he noticed the way her hair caught the light and the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. His heart fluttered. Over the week, he noticed he suddenly started becoming jealous whenever he saw Sophie with Ethan or other male. In the cafeteria on a fateful day, Zach's jealousy boiled over when he saw Sophie laughing with Ethan. He interrupted their conversation, his voice sharper than intended. "Don't you two have something better to do or eat in silence?" Sophie frowned. "What's your problem, Zach?" "My problem," he said, his gaze locked on hers, "is you acting like you belong here." Weeks passed and Zach's bullying becomes more conflicted as he finds himself drawn to Sophie in ways he doesn't understand. He switched from being a bully to constantly looking for every possible means to interact with Sophie. His interactions became a delicate dance of teasing banter and subtle glances. One morning, Sophie opened her locker to find a small, glittery note tucked inside. She frowned, pulling it out to see the words, "Good morning, beautiful," scrawled in messy handwriting. Before she could react, Zach appeared beside her, leaning casually against the lockers. "Thought you could use a little positivity to start your day," he said, his grin widening when she glared at him. Sophie was surprised. "Since when did you start becoming nice to me, Zach Morgan?" She stressed his name. "Oh yeah. You must have mistaken my locker to that of your many girlfriends. Here you may have it," she said, handing him the paper, her tone unexpectedly high as though she was jealous. She tried to walk past him, but Zach immediately held her, pulling her close to his chest.